Thank you so much, Dan, for joining us today. And I just quickly wanted to introduce everybody with the topic for today's demo days, which is reliable pipelines, predictable bills, and why do you actually have to settle one without another? This is something that we have been having very recent conversations with about, and it seems like that is something that people are generally interested to know about as well. So let me just run you quickly through the agenda, and then I'll probably hand it over to the expert himself, Dan Murphy, who'll walk us through all of these. So today we'll be discussing about reliability versus predictability. Why is it a myth? Where pipelines fails, and like where does your actual bill is inflating? How does a typical MAR pricing work? What does the live demo look like? Like how do you actually identify this in your pipeline? Your case study about like how eBury, a company who switched and saved a lot of costs with like a lot of reliability that they got, and like what are the 5 questions that you have to take out um, after the webinar to go back and check, like, is your pipeline both reliable and cost effective? I think, Dan, over to you. You can walk us through how does both worlds play together.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you very much. So, as was introduced, hello everyone. So, Dan Murphy, Director of Sales Engineering here at Hevo. So, if you go through a sales cycle, we will be talking. As I have a majority of all the sales accounts, so I hope to hear from everyone soon. So, if we talk about some of the things that we typically deal with ETL, that we just assume this is how the world operates, right? Talking to a lot of our customers, what they had a lot of problems with is silent failures. So they actually had to go into their ETL system, go out and figure out if the ETL product was working as expected. And they were never told that there were issues. The issues might have been brought up by the business users, that data was not being synced or that there was missing data. So there wasn't any proactive notification from the ETL tool itself. The other issue people are dealing with is schema changes. So, especially when you are connected to SaaS solutions, it's only inevitable before a certain amount of time that they're going to add new columns or add new tables or change the metadata on you. And so, you need a way to be reactive and be able to work around those issues without having those pipelines fail. And then the last piece that we see a lot of questions on is mismatched invoices. So when people go through contracting with a lot of our competitors, it makes sense on how they're going to be charged for the tool, what the expected price should look like. As time goes on, that price explodes, that price is changing, and they can't really figure out what is causing that change, right? Whether it is pricing increases, whether it is the pipeline itself and the data that's moving, it's very hard for the observability to be there to understand what's going on. So typically what people have decided is I either have reliable or I have predictable, right? I have reliable pipelines. They always do exactly what I want. The problem is my price may run away from me, right? I don't know what that price may look like because all of a sudden I have 100 billion records to update. But the good news is it still worked, right? So it's still reliable. Or I have predictable, right? Where I know exactly what my price is going to be because I am limiting the product so much to do only exactly what I want that as the product changes, it doesn't adopt those changes, but I always know my pricing because I know exactly what I'm bringing over, right? So when you look at some of our competitors like Fivetran and you have MAR pricing really affects how that works and the issues that you have. So typical failures that you don't see in your ETL tool that you usually have to go interrogate either your business users or the source system or the destination system and not the ETL tool is sometimes records fall out, right? There's always something weird sometimes that has an issue of moving over and you're not told of those records failing. That leads to those partial syncs that look complete. Right. So I may look like that I brought over all of the 100 million records, but really I only brought over 90 million records, right? And bring over all of the data, which in turn, if my table is updated frequently and often, my table may slightly start to fall behind a reality of what the data is. And the tool hasn't really told me any of that because a lot of those issues are just kind of dropped on the table of what is going on. Taking a look at how a small change can affect a big cost change, right? So if we look at schema drift, as I mentioned, it's inevitable before your SaaS tool decides they want to add a new column, change a data type, maybe add a new table. So it's only a matter of time before your schema starts to drift. So let's take an example of 100 billion records, right? I have a 100 billion record table, and all of a sudden it has a new column. So that means 100 billion new MARs, right? So that means I had to update and pay for the update of every single row inside of that table, which means I have a very expensive resync that just happened in order to just add a single column to an existing table. So MAR pricing, which is monthly active rows, makes you pay only once a row has been touched. Sounds like a good idea, right? It makes sense that I only pay for that row. I can update it as many times as I want. The issue is I don't always necessarily know how many times I'm updating that row. We've actually done a couple different POCs where customers weren't aware of how often they were updating the same row because they just assumed it was a MAR and it had changed. But what they actually found out is the way that their process was working, they were updating that data every day, even though it was the same value. So that was obfuscated by MAR. So with Hevo, what we do is we do event-based pricing. So let's move back to that 100 million record table that we were talking about, where I added one column. Yes, it's still 100 million events to add that one column to that table. The difference is our events are at a fraction of a MAR because I'm only adding the column and we're only charging you to add the column. We're not looking at the entire row. So yes, you will have more events than you have MARs. So don't be surprised when that happens. The difference is that our events are at a fraction of what a MAR is going to cost you. And if you're curious to understand how many events you may have when you have MAR-based pricing, we have a pricing calculator on our website where you can go out there. We'll give you a link to that along with the recording of this webinar. So you can go out there and get an idea of how many events you are looking at. So the thing is the best way to always do something is through a POC, right? Through a POC, I can figure out what my connections are. I can make sure that I'm moving over the right number of events. And then from there, we can narrow in on pricing. But pricing calculator is a great way to really just quickly understand exactly how many events you should expect inside of Hevo. So the nice thing is, as we mentioned, so Hevo is where reliability and predictability can happen at the same time. I can have a reliable pipeline and I can have predictable pricing. So the nice thing is the way that we work, so hands-free schema handling, as that schema changes in the source, we will automatically detect that. We will push that change down to the destination and the pipeline will continue on. So this will save a lot of the failures that you may currently be seeing. If there are any failures, we're going to go ahead and let you know immediately that there's an issue. We may not fail the pipeline because we allow up to 10,000 events to have an issue before we fail and roll back a pipeline. But what we'll do is we'll automatically notify you at the time of the event happening so that you can be reactive and fix that issue if it needs to happen. Then we have source efficiency. So typically a lot of our syncs are log-based syncing mechanisms. So the nice thing about that is we're not interrogating the source system. We're not running queries constantly against the source. So we're very efficient and we're very light touch on that source, right? Sometimes those source systems are OLTP systems and you don't want to bog them down because it might bog down how your business is running or how your business is able to do business. And so we're very efficient on the way that we touch our source systems compared to our competitors. So in a minute here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into a demo. I'm going to show you all of these things in action. So I'm going to show you how we did show you failure detection. I'm going to show you how we deal with schema drift. I'm going to show you what our monitoring observability looks like. And then I'm going to go ahead and show you our pricing and our usage views so that we are 100% transparent in you understanding what you're paying for and what your bill is going to be. So let's go ahead and let's jump to a demo. So let me change screens here and let me jump into Hevo. So Hevo is a completely managed SaaS application. So in here, you're going to create your pipelines, and your pipelines have a source, a destination. And then you set up that pipeline to choose how often you want it to sync. You choose what objects you want it to sync. And then that's it. You're off to the races. Things are happening. And we'll go ahead and tell you all the information behind of what's going on. So if we take a look at some of these pieces that I mentioned, right? So the first thing we wanted to talk about was failure detection. So if I go up here to this little bell icon, I can click on that guy, and it's going to show me all of the alerts that have happened inside of the system. So I have alerts over here that may show some failures, right? So any of these failures, I was notified. I can choose how this notification works. So in this case, I can go to settings, and I can set up email notifications. I can put any email address I want in here. Keeping in mind, Hevo doesn't charge for users or people accessing the Hevo system. We charge only by events. So the nice thing is I can add an email maybe for Teams, and I can let Teams notifications know. Or maybe I can add an email for a distribution list, or add an email for other people on the team. We also have the ability to integrate with Slack. So if you want to go ahead and send that message directly to Slack when there's an issue, we can go ahead and do that. Excuse me. You can also choose which issues you want to see notifications on. So if the system is too chatty, you can change that as well, or you can have full notifications enabled. So let's go back to our alerts. And let's go back here and let's take a look at this job, and it will tell me what happened. In this case, it marked the entire job as a failure. And that's because every single object in this pipeline failed. And then it's going to give me a reason for this failure. So in this case, it's telling me that there's a wall issue, and I need to resync the pipeline. So all I would have to do to resolve this issue is go up here, click on resync pipeline. It's going to reset my offset to make sure that I'm in charge, and then everything's going to go ahead and continue on. So the nice thing is you can always see what's happening inside your pipelines, right? So if I take a look at any of these existing pipelines, I can say, let's take a look at this Postgres. So I can see that I had a failure here. So once again, it's another wall sync issue. I went ahead and resynced, and it brought in that new data. The nice thing is I can always see exactly what data has been brought in. So I can open this up. I can see that we added, it looks like 100 rows to the employees table, and then 100 rows to this CSV test table. So I can see my input increased by 100 events and my output increased by 100 events. So I know I saw exactly 100 in the source, and I loaded exactly 100 in the destination. So the nice thing about all of this is running, I'm able to check out my billing. So I can jump over here to my usage summary. I can see every single pipeline that I have. So let's give it a second here. And I can see how many times it ran. I can see how many events came through that pipeline. I can look at it at a monthly level. So here are all the pipelines, including ones that are deleted, because there are no events for this month, but there were for last month. I can see the total number of events rolling through the system. And if I wanted to, I can always download, and I can go to a detailed usage report, and I can go by pipeline. And if I download this report, it'll be emailed to me. I've already pulled it up. Here's my email. And what it is it will tell me how many times that pipeline ran, how many events were in each run, and the current state of the pipeline. So I have historical loaded, incremental loaded, and total loaded. The nice thing about Hevo, we do not charge for historical load. So that a first initial sync that you get with Hevo doesn't cost you any events. So going back to that 100 billion row table, the first time I sync, I don't use 100 billion events to pull in the first sync. I only am charged the incremental after that. So that's what I'm seeing inside of my detail events. So I can go ahead and do my analysis here. The goal is transparency. You always know exactly what you're being charged for and what's happening. The last thing I wanted to show was schema drift and how we handle that. So let's take a look at some pipelines here. So I have this SQL Server to Snowflake pipeline set up. And in this pipeline, what I have is when this pipeline ran earlier today, I only had 4 columns in my customer table. And then I added a column and I went ahead and I resynced. I just went up to here and just forced a resync now. It would also happen based on whenever the pipeline was scheduled to run. I just went ahead and kind of forced it. So if I take a look at this pipeline when it ran, everything ran through and came through here. The nice thing is I can always download a session log to see exactly the detail of what happened. So if I go and I open up this session log, let's pull this into Visual Studio Code so it's a little easier to read. And what I can do is I can look for this new column in this data. So this is going to tell me everything that happened in the connection for this job run. It'll tell me how the connection went, what it queried against the CDC and SQL Server. In this case, what it's doing is it's pulling in the information. And then down here, what it says is, hey, we noticed that the destination schema is different. And we noted a new column. And then down here, we go ahead and we add the new column to the destination so that the pipeline can continue. So just that easily, we added this new column. It would work the same way as if I deleted a column. It would work the same way if my column metadata changed, like maybe a data type change from a number to a varchar or something like that. So, but very easily, I can see that it didn't affect my pipeline. My pipeline recognized the change and it moved it automatically to my destination. So that way, as the fluidity of my source system changes, my pipeline updates, and I go ahead and I move that over to my destination. So let's jump back here to our slides. All right, so what did I just show you? I showed you the failure detection. So I showed you the alert section and how I was able to see those. I went into the jobs. I saw the alert. I saw what happened. I was also notified via email. So I got an email in my system that told me the exact same thing that I showed you in the tool. I showed you how schema drift was handled. So I showed you what happened when I added a column, how it detected a new column, and then went ahead and added the new column and loaded the values. And then I have my monitoring and observability. So I showed you how each one of the jobs is available. I can see how often they ran. I can see if there were any issues, if there were any failures. If any of those events failed, it would have told me what event failed and I would have been able to fix it. And then, of course, the pricing and usage views I showed you as well. So one of our key tenets is what we are trying to make sure that we are very transparent and you understand what your billing is and that you have no surprises. So at any point in time, I can go out into the Hevo system, figure out what's going on. And I showed you that through the logs. I downloaded the detail log, which gave me the every single job that is run by pipeline. And I'm able to see the events that were flowing through it. So let's talk about one of our case studies, one of our customers. So eBerry was one of our customers that came to us from Fivetran. They were having some issues with some bugs with the software, and then they were getting limited support from the support team. It was taking weeks or days to get back from support on issues that they were seeing. They were having unpredictable costs. They were seeing an explosion in their costs. And of course, they were seeing a lot of schema drift and schema changes, and there wasn't an easy way to handle that. So what they wanted is they wanted something that was reliable, had fewer bugs. In the case where they did have issues, they wanted better responsiveness from their support team. They wanted predictable costs, and they wanted to see automatic schema adaptation as things change. We went through a POC. They thought it was awesome because it is. And they went ahead and decided to move over to Hevo and to replace Fivetran. So in doing this, they gained a lot more confidence in their data. They were able to move over the same amount of data pipelines that they had before. They were able to get down to a 15-minute refresh. And if they didn't have any issues, they were able to contact support and they were able to get support very quickly to respond and to help them move through, which of course increased their stakeholder trust in their data, which made everyone use the data a lot more. So how do I know if I have any of these issues, right? So here are a couple of questions I can quickly ask to figure out if my pipelines are as stable as I think they are, right? The first question, do you get alerted when there's a failure? Or do you actually have to go out there and either interrogate the system or ask some of the users if there are any issues? Another issue is if a schema changes, does everything break or does your pipeline adapt? Another question is, can you expect timely support when there are critical issues? We had talked to a couple of customers and they were literally down for weeks waiting for support to get back to them on issues. Other things I can talk about are, do you understand your pipeline costs before the invoice arrives? Is it predictable? Is it a big surprise? Are you able to understand what's happening in your pricing? And then talking about new pipelines. So if you're going to add a new pipeline, do you have to worry about paying for a new connector? Because a lot of our competitors, they actually charge by the connectors that you're using. Some of our competitors even have different levels of connectors. So you may be charged a different price depending on if it's a supported connector or if it's a community developed connector. So there's a couple different options there. So if you answered yes to any of these questions, I would definitely think that you need to do an evaluation of Hivo to see if we can fit and solve some of these problems. The good news is it's extremely easy to try Hivo, right? You can just go out to hivodata.com, create an account. You don't have to have a credit card or anything like that. You just sign up with your business email. We'll give you 14 days to try everything. It's a time limited trial. So you have full functionality. You can move over as many rows or events as you want. And then you'll be able to understand how our product works and how our reliability is. Also, if you're coming from Fivetran, we do have a team that can assist in that migration. So we do have technical account managers that will be assigned to the account. We'll help you move those objects over. We'll help make that as seamless as possible. If you're in the middle of a Fivetran contract, we can also talk about that. And we have a couple different ways to help you with that and move from that. And of course, you can always go out to our website and try our MAR to events calculator to get an idea of how many events you're going to have to Mars. As I mentioned, your number of events is going to jump a lot more than your Mars, but our price per event is way lower. And as you go up in pricing, we do not scale linearly. So what I mean by that is, let's just say 1 million events per month, and then you want to move to 2 million events per month, your contract doesn't double because as you go up in number of events, your cost per event will go down. So don't be worried about it being twice as expensive if you're going to move twice as many events. We do not scale that way. So that
Awesome.
was the presentation we
Yeah.
wanted to talk about, right?
Awesome.
So
Thank you
now
so
we're on
much,
to the
Dan.
Q&A section. If anyone has any questions. So what we wanted to show you is that you can have both reliable and predictable in your ETL solution, and Hivo can definitely help you out with that.
Thank you so much, Dan, for walking us through, a quick demo, what kind of choices that folks have to make. The Q&A tab is open for questions, and I think meanwhile, while everybody like kind of asks their questions, I have a question for you, and I think that would be on pretty much everybody's mind. So, how much like an operational uplift like somebody has to do while they're doing that switch, like, or is that something which is easy for folks to, how's the learning curve looking like?
The learning curve is very simple. Our product is very similar to Fivetran in the fact that we have a source, a destination, and then you choose how often you want it to sync. So it's a very easy UI to understand and to learn. As far as how much of a heavy lift it is to move from Fivetran to Hivo, it's not a lot. As I mentioned, we have a team that can help you with that and make it a lot easier in that transition. We can make sure that we load the same objects. We can make sure that we don't break existing downstream ETL processes that you may have looking for specific columns in specific places. So we can make sure that all of that is transparent and very easy to use.
Got it. Understood. So we have one question in the chat that says, can you expand on light touch source sync as in log-based sync? Does it use interim storage? And what is the average sync time?
Sure. So as far as log-based syncing, so what we'll do, so let's go for Postgres. And because each different database is going to have different logs that we're going to use, like SQL Server is going to have CDC, Postgres is going to have write ahead logs. So what we'll do is we'll check that write ahead log, and that'll tell us the new rows and the updated information we need to go against. And then we'll go ahead and we'll pull information from there. What might happen, depending on which competitor you're using, they may actually run a query against the source system in order to find those new records, which means that there is going to be a cost in CPU usage and a higher usage on the source than we have with our logs. Not every system uses logs. A lot of them do, so we use them where we can. So that way, that's how we're a lot softer on the touching there. And what was the second part of that question?
The frequency of time sync. Like, what is
And
the
how long
average?
do the syncs take? So that
Yeah.
depends on a lot of things. So I get to use that wonderful sales answer of it depends. Been in sales for 20 years. I hate that answer, but it is legitimately truth because it depends on a lot of different pieces. If you're updating a couple hundred records or updating a couple thousand or a couple million, those are different. Also, network topology is key here, right? Some of these sources may be behind firewalls or maybe an SSH tunnel we have to jump through. Sometimes the SSH tunnel might be the bottleneck, and the next time you run it, it won't be there. Sometimes the cloud services that we're writing to, sometimes they're having issues. Sometimes Snowflake or any of the destinations might be having issues. Usually those issues are resolved, but because of that fluidity of kind of the topology of all the different systems that we're connecting to, it's hard to say what an average time is to sync. But typically it is within minutes. Sometimes it's the only time we see like hours or anything like that is that first initial historical sync. So I've done a couple POCs where we were syncing a couple billion records, and those were very loaded billion records, meaning that some of their columns were were varchar columns, and they had nested embedded JSON objects. So they were like over 16 megs per column inside of a billion row table. So in that one, it took us a little while to load it, but that was just that initial first historical sync. What you need to do is really pay attention to the incremental syncs that you're going to see after that first load, and you'll get a better idea with that. But as I said, I hate the answer of it depends, but it really does depend on what your data looks like as far as how long it takes those syncs to happen. But we do it efficiently. We are always working to make sure that it is efficient. We are constantly benchmarking our product against our competitors. And I can say with Fivetran, we are either at par with them or we are faster than them in most of our sync times.
Amazing, amazing. So I do not see any more questions in the chat as of now. So that means we're going to end this demo day. But thank you so much, Dan, for joining in and helping us walk through the whole two choices that don't need to be made for most of the folks now. And for the folks who joined, thank you so much for joining in. We'll make sure that we send all the required resources that we promised in your inbox. Please keep an eye out, and hopefully, we see each other again in, next demo days or webinars. Thank you.